Hello, and welcome back to another Sunday School lesson. We are now still in the Book of Mormon. We will be for the rest of the year, so stop asking. Actually, no one's asked. Regardless, we're in 1 Nephi 16 through 22, and the title of this lesson is, I Will Prepare the Way Before You. And as I've done with the previous lessons, I'm going to basically tell the story of what's happened in the Book of Mormon up until this point. So the story up till now type of thing. And mainly because just in case you've never read the Book of Mormon and you don't know what's in it, basically is why I'm doing that. So that is where we are at with that. So at this point, when we left off, they had gone back to Jerusalem and convinced Ishmael to come and join them in the wilderness. So at this point, Ishmael has joined them, and they're in the wilderness. So they wake up one morning, and Lehi, the prophet, and the patriarch of the family, really, they convinced Ishmael and his family to join them. So, there's the two families in there, and Lehi, the patriarch, the prophet who received the revelation to go into the wilderness. Just to kind of help clarify that, I hope. He woke up and discovered a strange object outside his tent door, and it was an orb, a circular, it was a metal compass. I want to say it was made of gold. It's either bronze or gold. I always forget which. But it was, a well-crafted object. And he didn't really know where it came from, and it turned out to be a type of compass known as the Liahona, and it pointed the direction that they should go in the wilderness. So, they followed the Liahona, and they went into the wilderness. So as they're going out in the wilderness, Nephi and his brothers were hunted for food, for sustenance, and that sort of thing, so that they could have everything they needed in the wilderness. Now, while they were hunting it, Nephi's bow, which was made of fine metal, broke. And his brothers' bows had already broken. They had lost their spring, is what it says. So I'm actually not entirely sure what that means bow-wise. I've always kind of assumed that it just the bowstring stopped being taut, and so it didn't have the spring anymore. But it could also refer to kind of the wood of the bow or the metal of the bow. Regardless, they didn't have any working bows, and they came back defeated. They couldn't get food for their family. At this point, pretty much everyone in the family, including Lehi, began to kind of murmur. They were out there in the middle of the wilderness. They had no means of getting food, and they felt lost, and they felt like God had abandoned them. And Nephi is only one who doesn't murmur or complain at this point. What Nephi does is he goes out and he crafts a bow himself. And, he put forth the effort, crafted the bow, just put it together. Once he got it crafted and working, he went to his father, who and said, where should I go? Where does the Lord want me to go to find meat for our family? Now, this is significant in of itself because, Nephi being the only one who wasn't murmuring, he could easily have just gone out on his own and found the food on his own, but he still recognized that his father was in charge of the family. He was the prophet. And so he immediately went to his father, even though his father wasn't necessarily in the best place, and he asked, where should I go that we might find food, that we might not perish in the wilderness? And Lehi presumably was humbled by Nephi's words and Nephi coming to him, and he went and he looked at the compass. It's called a Liahona. If I didn't mention that before, it became known as the Liahona. And he discovered that there were new words writing on it. Now, I'm not entirely sure how this works. Growing up, I always pictured it as kind of a puzzle thing that would show different letters and that they would rotate either automatically or could be rotated manually. I honestly have no idea. That's how I pictured it in my head. Recently, a few people have said no, writing just appeared on it. Either way, new writing appeared on the Liahona, however that happened, which basically said that the Liahona is essentially a compass, but it works depending upon the faithfulness of the people who are using it. So you basically, if you're faithful and obeying God's commandments, it will work. If you're not, it won't work. So that, that's, I think, very seriously humbled Lehi. And he realized, okay, this is why it stopped working. We were put in the wilderness, and this is why. So he told Nephi, he consulted the compass, told Nephi where to go, and Nephi went and found meat, and they did not perish in the wilderness. So they traveled for quite a long time and eventually came to the sea. Now, when they went to the... they stayed by the sea for quite a while. And one day Nephi receives a commandment of the Lord to build a ship. Now, Nephi had never built a ship before. He had no idea how to do it. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said, I will show you how to do it. So I will show you where the metal is. I will show you everything you need to know. So he smelted I believe he smelted metal, if I'm remembering correctly. There's a famous painting that shows Nephi working at a forge-like thing. So I think... So that's why I'm a little confused here. I don't know if I'm remembering what's actually in the scriptures or just that painting. But regardless, he was sent to find the materials he needed to build a ship. And he was given instructions on how to build a ship from the Lord. And it was not like any sort of shipbuilding that had ever been done before. It was according to the plans of the Lord. So he started to build the ship. And as he's building the ship, his brothers show up and say... Oh, you're just a foolish person. You've never built a ship before. You don't know how to do this. Ha ha ha. It seems like a very sibling theme. But at this point, all of both Nephi and his brothers should have been adults at this point. So it seems kind of puerile that they would laugh and make fun of Nephi. Regardless, they did do this. They made fun of Nephi. They were like, you think you can build a ship? You're just as nuts as our father is. And Nephi was saddened at this, not like his brothers thought that he realized he couldn't build a boat. He did not feel that, but he was sad that his brothers, after all this time, after all the miracles, all the stuff they'd seen and done, they would still not have enough faith in the Lord, to realize that Nephi had been commanded to do this. And so Nephi basically said, I've been commanded of the Lord to do this. And there's kind of an interesting moment where they get mad at Nephi again and want to lay hands on him and I don't know, beat him up or something. At this point, I'm not sure what their motivation is, but it's probably some sort of physical attack against Nephi. And Nephi says, no, do not touch me. I am full of the Spirit of the Lord, and you will just wither away and die if you touch me. And so convincing was his statements that his brother's like, okay, no, we're not touching him. We're not doing that. Now I find that really interesting. They can't believe that Nephi has been commanded to build a ship, but they believe Nephi's words when he says, I am filled with the Spirit of the Lord, and it will destroy you. So this strikes me as this is just my personal opinion, that it's down to, okay, we can make fun of and beat up our brother as long as there's no real threat to us. We physically we can beat up Nephi and, but if there's an actual threat to us, no, hey, we're not touching that. So that's what it feels like to me. I could be wrong. Let me know what you think at the end of the video. Regardless, They were afraid to touch Nephi at this point. Now, the Spirit of the Lord whispered to Nephi, it's like, touch your brothers, they will not wither away, but I will shock them, and they will remember, you know, they will just realize that you are full of the Spirit. So Nephi reaches out, tases his brothers, essentially. I'm putting that, in a rather funny manner, but they were shocked, and they realized that, oh, Nephi has been inspired of the Lord. So they, at that point on, they seem to help and cooperate with him building the ship. So after building the ship, they finally get it all built, all done. They load up their family and supplies and launch out into the ocean. They go out there and they travel for many days on the boat. Now, when they get in the middle of the ocean, basically Laman, Lemuel, their families, they pretty much just start partying. And they, just party. And Lehi, at this point, has grown quite old, and he and his wife Sariah are quite sick. And they aren't able to, do anything at this point. Nephi basically, and at this point, a storm, comes up and starts to blow the ship backward. They lose ground essentially in this, and Nephi, upbraided. That word sounds good in my head, but I can't say it at the moment. He basically confronts them about this and say, you guys need to stop. We need to obey the commandments. This is not appropriate at this time. Look at what's happening. The ship is being blown backwards. At which point Laman and Lemuel essentially, take Nephi and tie him up. And for, I think two or 3 days, it does actually say in the Book of Mormon, I just can't remember offhand how many days, but he was, for, a few days in a storm, Nephi was tied up outside, he was, tied up in a storm while his brothers partied. Now, the storm got so bad that pretty much everybody on board believed that the ship would sink and they would all die. And eventually at this time, Laman and Lemuel do release Nephi, and he talks about how, like, his hands are all swollen up. He's, I presume, in a great deal of pain. Now, I'm going to ask you straight up, and answer to yourself, this is, just be entirely honest, what would your reaction be at this point? Would you would you complain? Would you murmur? Would you, like, hit your brother's back? What would you do? Well, I have no idea what I would do at this point, but I know I probably wouldn't do what Nephi did, which was he immediately thanked the Lord and praised the Lord that he was able, to survive his ordeal, but also that he was finally released from it, which is, I don't know if I would have that sort of forgiveness or faith or patience. So Nephi, at this point, picks up the Liahona, and it begins to work for them, and the storms subside, and they're able to continue their journey, eventually landing in the Promised Land, which is the American continent. Now, at this point in the lesson, Nephi, we'll get into this a little bit more, but Nephi records a couple of the prophecies of Isaiah are recorded in the Book of Mormon at this point, and afterwards Nephi gives his interpretation of them. And I would suggest you actually take a look at it and read it. Isaiah is very hard to understand, but it's, when you have a prophet, explain what it actually means, it's a lot easier, I think, for everyone when that happens. So that's a quick rundown of what's been happening in the meantime. So let's get on to the lesson. So the first aspect of the lesson, and you can see how it's appropriate to this lesson, is when I keep the commandments... Oh, that guy's walking right in my path. When I keep the commandments, God will help me face challenges. So, the Lord commanded Lehi and his family to go into the wilderness to do all this stuff. But he never said it would be easy. And indeed, if we look at the journey, it's incredibly challenging. They go without food for a while. They have to live, without any real creature comforts. They have to travel with a tent, which, while traveling, they have to, put up every night and then take down every night. It's a lot of work and a lot of effort that they have to put in. They went without food when their bows were destroyed, and they had to, keep going. And then, after spending, a good chunk of time by the seashore, they have to build a ship, having never built a ship before, going purely on instructions from the Lord, and have faith that the ship would be seaworthy and they wouldn't get in the middle of the ocean and then sink. And, in addition to that, Nephi himself is tied up for a good chunk of the journey during a storm, and, only after he's released does it subside. So, yeah, pretty much everyone, Nephi in particular, but everyone went through a really, really difficult time on this journey. But the thing about it that this lesson makes abundantly clear is that if we have the faith in the Lord, if we do what he says and what he commands, it's not going to be easy, but we will be able to accomplish it. And that's the thing. The Lord doesn't give us commandments that can't be accomplished. Even when they seem completely impossible to us, they can still be done. And Nephi seems to be blessed with just absolute faith in this principle. If you read through just the first two books of the Book of Mormon, it records this very well. He had absolute faith that if he kept the commandments, he would be blessed of the Lord, and he would be able to accomplish what the Lord has asked him. And it really is a great lesson. Just obey the commandments, and it will work out, one way or the other. So, the next part of the lesson is the Lord guides me through small and simple means. So oftentimes when we'll be guided just by really small, simple things. It's not going to be hugely complex things like a big, gigantic sign pointing the way or anything like that. Although it could, in certain circumstances, very well be that. But we don't always, it's often going to be very simple, very small things. And in this case, it refers to the Liahona, the compass that Lehi found, that guided them. Now, I've in recent years, well, last 20 or so years, I feel so old, I've started to use the metaphor that the Liahona was essentially like a modern cell phone with a map app in it. And essentially, it will show you where you are, and it will show and even tell you directly through, a magical voice that comes out of the ether, how to get where you're going. Now, the Liahona pretty much worked exactly the same way. Writing appeared on it. It told them where they should go. But it was much more reliable than a telephone app. It was because it came from the Lord. He made it work in that way. And ultimately, it was reliant on the people who use it having faith and obeying the commandments of the Lord. So if you have faith and obey the commandments, this is an incredible tool for guiding you where you need to go. It could show you where to go to get food. It showed you where to go to just where you're supposed to go on your journey, but how to get food, how to, all these little details. I imagine it doesn't record, but I imagine it showed them where, water was, where other things were. It was truly a great tool for them to use, and it was just a small little thing that guided them in this way. And as you go on in life, you'll find small things will help guide you. I mean, scriptures themselves are quite small, and you can carry scriptures in a phone nowadays. It's something that small can contain so much information. All the scriptures out there can be, you can have on your phone. And they can guide you at really any time as long as it has power. And, it's just through small and simple things we are often guided. It's very rare that something major or big will guide us. It's generally through just the small, the subtle things. And I think we have to remember that and really pay attention to the things around us. And that way we will know what the Lord wants us to do. So, one of the things, getting into the part where Nephi quotes Isaiah and then explains it. So right before he does, he explains his method of reading and understanding Isaiah, and really it's a method that should be used by all of us when we look at scriptures. And it says essentially, I can liken all scriptures to myself. And that is really, really very true. If you read the scriptures and read it in such a way as to put yourself in the scriptures, saying like, okay, this scripture is addressed to me. So if they're given instructions, insert your name where where the name of the person getting instructions is, and so on and so forth. So we can actually take and apply all scriptures into our lives. Some of them may not be applicable to us immediately, but if we keep that in mind, when the situation comes up in our life, we'll be able to say, oh, yeah, there's this part in the scriptures. I remember now. And, it's not going to be entirely us. The Lord, the Holy Ghost will inspire us at that point if we liken scriptures to us, if we keep our mind open, if we look to the small and simple things, we'll be able to realize that, oh, this scripture was talking about me. It's really very, very incredible. So one of the things that comes up, and this is pretty much a purely doctrinal thing, but they refer to the house of Israel and to Gentiles. So the question the lesson asks is, who are the house of Israel and who are the Gentiles? So basically, what it boils down to, the house of Israel are descendants of Jacob, who was Israel, in the Old Testament, and the Gentiles, by the definitions, are anybody who has not accepted the gospel into their lives. So, what happens if you're not a literal descendant of Israel, and you accept the gospel? You get adopted into one of the tribes. So really, this definition refers to everyone who has ever lived and who will ever live and who are currently living. It refers to everyone pretty much. Like I've just said that. But yeah, when you accept the gospel, you become part of the house of Israel. When you If you haven't accepted the gospel yet in your life, you are, by this definition, a Gentile. Now, Gentiles aren't bad people, and the house of Israel aren't necessarily good people. We are all just people. And it's ultimately down to us what we do with what we've got. If we're adopted into the tribe of Israel, do we behave like members of that tribe, or do we not? Nephi's older brothers, Laman and Lemuel, who tried several times to kill him, and at the very least beat him up and be quite mean to him, were direct descendants of the house of Israel, of Joseph. Yes, the tribe of Joseph. Well, direct descendants of Joseph, who I believe had Ephraim and Manasseh underneath them. I'm going to have to look that up. I always get confused about the names of different tribes, but I believe that's the case. Regardless, yeah, they were pretty much of the house of Israel, and yet what did they do with it? They tried to kill their younger brother because they didn't like the fact that he was blessed of the Lord, that he was to become a prophet, that he was a very faithful young man. And there's that. Then there are people who have not accepted the gospel into their lives, but are amongst the kindest and most wonderful people you will ever meet. And so it's the House of Israel is a distinction to be made to people, but it's ultimately what we do with it that will matter. And if you haven't accepted the gospel in your life, but then you do, you will become part of the House of Israel. So yep. So yeah, pretty much it comes down to you and your decisions and your choices that you make in your life. So let's see, we'll get a good kind of background light there. Anyway, that is the lesson for this week. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.